Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see so many folks logging into today's Internship Bootcamp and webinar. My name is Kirsten Brindley. I serve as the Executive Director of the Baltimore Collegetown Network. Baltimore Collegetown hosts this event with support and partnership from the Maryland Career Consortium and also the Maryland Technology Internship Program. We've been hosting the Internship Bootcamp for a number of years, and we are very excited to focus today's conversation on the labor market and recruiting trends. So how have the last 2 years really affected college students and as they go about their job search? I know that folks are, still logging in. We just started about a minute ago. So I would love to see the chat light up with where folks are calling in from. So if you could do just a quick intro and say where you're logging on from. And I know Dr. Gardner, I had shared some of the industries that you all represent, but if you would like to include your industry, where you work, if you're an employer, would love to see which industries you're representing as well. It will help kind of tailor our conversation today. I know that we have a lot of great folks that are joining us from our colleges and universities, but we know we have even more. So if you could share your organization, perhaps your industry, where you're calling in from, we would love to see that in the chat. If you have not maybe participated in a Zoom webinar yet, the way that this works is that we do have a Q&A feature. So if you would like to submit questions to be answered at the end of today's presentation, you can submit those in the Q&A. The panelists and I can see those, so feel free to submit them at any time throughout today's talk, and we'll get those answered at the end. And then you can also, put comments and discussion in the chat. Your video and mics are muted for the webinar today, so the chat is the best way to stay engaged in the conversation. You can also, again, like I said, add your questions in the Q&A. Before we turn things over to Dr. Gardner, I did want to talk just a little bit about who Baltimore Collegetown is. We are a nonprofit organization that works with 13 colleges and universities in the Baltimore region. We work with a mix of public and private, small, large, HBCUs, art schools, community colleges, and our work is really focused on attracting students to the region, so promoting Baltimore as a great college town, engaging students in Baltimore while they are college students, and then giving them the tools that they need to stay after graduation. We all know that one of those tools is internships, as those typically lead to better career opportunities for our students. In the Baltimore region, about 60% of our students go through an internship at some point in their college career, and we want to make sure that they know about great opportunities in Baltimore. So we have a Baltimore Collegetown internship platform where companies can post. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. This is a one-stop shop for employers. So if you're an employer who's looking for some college interns, please visit this website where you can post an internship, and it connects to all of our career centers. So this is a great place to get the word out about upcoming opportunities. We monitor this regularly, so once you submit, it typically takes about a day or so to get it posted on our site. Baltimore Collegetown also hosts events throughout the year called Industry Days that promote different industries for college students in Baltimore. We'll follow up from this event with more information on that. Also, one more housekeeping thing. We are recording today's webinar, and it will be uploaded to our YouTube page. All folks who registered will get a copy of the webinar sent out to them after the event. One more thing that I'd like to make sure that you all have readily available is the labor trends report that Dr. Gardner will be referencing. I will also drop that in the chat if you'd like to follow along as we present, as Dr. Gardner presents today. And without further ado, I will go ahead and tee things up for Dr. Gardner. For 51 years, CERI has been conducting annual research on the college labor market by surveying thousands of employers to gain insight on the demand for entry-level and early career hires for internships, co-ops, and full-time employment. Dr. Gardner leads all of the work to produce these reports and is truly an expert in the field of labor markets and how it impacts early career hires. We are so excited for him to present to us today and to share his work. And I will turn things over to Dr. Gardner. I'll mute myself. I'll keep monitoring the chat and pull up his slides.
Yes. Thank you very much, Kristen. I'm glad to be with everybody today. As you can see, we started talking out early about the weather. It is cold here. And I'm looking forward to the 40-degree weather that's supposed to be here by the weekend. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to, instead of just reviewing I'm going to review some of the work that we started in the fall about what was going to happen in the labor market. It's kind of the midterm now. So I'll kind of upgrade that. I'll do a little less on just giving lots and lots of numbers. I encourage you to grab a hold of the report if you haven't already, because I delved into numbers a lot deeper in the report, and they're there for you to look at. We'll spend some time on internships and what we see happening there, at least in response to COVID, compared what happened over the last 2 years. And then I'm going to spend a little more time talking about what employers are expecting out of this COVID period as they continue to recruit, and both for interns and full-time hires, and what the implications and the reality of having digital and AI-assisted recruiting. So Kristen's going to advance my slides when I ask, because I just want to make sure there's no problems. Our university's still locked down. We don't get back on campus until next week, so everything's remote. So I'm working from home, and I just want to make sure that we don't have any problems with connections. So Kristen's going to advance the slides. So Kristen, you go to the next slide. So most of you are aware, living in the DC area, you've got to be aware of all the economic going on, at least in the political arena. And there is so much going on out there that's affecting both short-term and long-term hiring and recruiting and talent development for organizations. This is not a recession, so we don't see the normal kind of things that we usually see in recessions, and we can back to seeing is a lot of different things occurring at the same time. Some of them are directly attributed to COVID. If nothing else, COVID accelerated a lot of changes that were going on in the labor market and recruiting. At the same time, there's been some some downsides definitely to COVID. And then there's some issues going on there in the college arena. And, the participants here can talk to that, both at the community college and the 4-year, that are going to have longer term impacts than even COVID. So I'm not going to cover every single one of these. Let me just talk about a little bit about some of them. Inflation really doesn't have a direct impact. Well, it does have an impact, but it doesn't have an immediate impact on hiring. Most of the hiring will take place. What's going to happen with the inflation is what it's going to do for wages and the pressure it's going to put on wages, in addition to some of the other things that are going on. So this inflationary period started out is really a supply chain problem, and it remains at the core a supply chain problem, which you don't seem to be able to really correct, and it's taken a while, and we just don't seem to be able to get our hands on it. Around it. It looks like the report came out this morning about the chip situation, and we've never been this low in our reserve of chips, and it's going to start affecting everything. A lot of the problem with chip development happens to be in isolated places. So anyway, we've got a problem there, and it's not the only part of the supply chain that's broken. So we're going to see a real evaluation of the supply chain. But what's killing inflation right now is you and me. We have been buying and demanding a lot of goods. The initial part of the COVID, we didn't spend a lot of money and we held back, and we bought services, but we didn't buy goods. But now we really, in the last 9 months, really accelerated our demand for goods at a time when they can't be supplied. So as a result, prices are going up. And just for an example, in 2020, the area that we call buy now, pay later, it's been around a long time, but it's now easier to do that than ever. That was $20 billion in 2020. In 2021, it was $100 billion. So we're buying things, we don't often have the money for them, and that's not credit card debt. That's credit cards different, in a different line. But just our purchasing has been enormous, and it's really punching up inflation. And the problem there is it's going to get embedded, because it's going to take a long time to catch up. And then if we start seeing inflation, and we're kind of lazy when it comes to inflation, we've been holding inflation down and interest rates down below historical levels for a long time, and now we're going to feel it for a while, and it's going to be upsetting. The other phenomenon out there we're all dealing with, and you're probably dealing with it on your campus and your organization, how you're going to deal with remote work. Not that remote work is something brand new and unfamiliar. It's been around for a while, and there are companies like Intel that have been invested in remote work for a long time. But what we're seeing is organizations trying to figure out what's going on with and how much remote work is going to be viable for their organizational culture, and how lenient managers are going to be. In the early stages, it was romanticized in the press. Everybody was going to go to it. Reality has set in. It's having implications that organizations, that trouble organizations and managers from, even though many of the people that are working remote are very, very productive. It's breaking down organizational culture, and it's having other ramifications. So we don't know if the end game is going to be on remote work. It's going to be here. It's going to be part of our lives. Some organizations are going to be much more willing to provide remote opportunities, while others will restrict it to maybe a day a week, maybe 2 days a week, depending on the job function, where the facilities are located. I think the biggest thing, and everybody's well aware of this, is what we're calling the Great Resignation, the Great Quit. It has to do with this phenomena of people just walking off their jobs with not another job in hand. This is called the quick rate. Some of you may be familiar with this. The Bureau of Labor Statistics looks at separations from an organization every month, and they have these are some categories. Roughly, they have voluntary leaves that are out of the workforce for retirement purposes or health reasons, or so they're not expected to come back into the workplace. Then there's the involuntary leaves, and these are ones that are results of downsizing, companies failing. There are also people getting fired or and let go. And then there's the voluntary rate separation, or the quit, where people just up and walk off the jobs. And historically, that's been in the high 30s, 40s. This past June, it soared to 70% and has been staying very high, and set a record in November with the number of people that voluntarily quit and left. And it's causing nightmares for HR folks at all, because they have all levels of people leaving, from, and some of it's primarily in low wage jobs. The hospitality accommodations sector has been particularly hit hard by people not wanting to work for the wages that were there, and you're seeing wages accelerate. But this is a multi-level thing. It's not just a labor movement because of wages, though wages have been suppressed for the middle income, low income for decades now, and they're walking, stimulated, spurred on by what emerged out of COVID. But this is really basically a shift in how people look at work that's been coming for a long time. If you followed me early on, I talk about work identity a lot. Work identity is a measure of how much an individual identifies who they are through their work. And no group is higher on work identity than boomer males. Boomers are absorbed by who they are, and of course it affects boomer females, but they scored all-time high on these scales. Since then, the cohorts after them have been less and less absorbed by their identity by work. They want a balance. They want it between other aspects of their life, whether it's family or spiritual or travel or whatever they value in their life. They want a balance. Now that doesn't mean that that there's a shift and there's people that don't want to work. They're not shirking their work. They work very hard for their 40 hours a week, but they want to be let alone the rest of the time. Or they're willing to, with the idea of remote work, I'll work for you, 3 or 4 days a week at 12, 14 hours a day, but then the rest of the time is my own and I don't want you to call me. This has been coming. It's particularly prevalent among millennials and Gen Z. And what you're seeing is a shift as boomers move out, and we'll have one last talk about boomers moving out in a minute, but boomers moving out and no longer dominating the workplace, so they're certainly trying to hold on in the political arena. And as we see younger and younger people start taking over, and particularly women, we're going to see a shift. So in the immediate response to this phenomena of the quit rate has been to plug holes with salaries and trying to raise wages and responding to that. A lot of it has been coming now. It's time to change your organizational culture, and you might have to do that more from the quit rate than the remote work as you try to balance out the needs and concerns of younger people that are now dominating the workplaces versus what boomers put in place and insist happen in the workplace. Women have been severely impacted by the pandemic. The number of women leaving was unprecedented. The workforce was unprecedented. Mainly they had to leave to take care of family and children. They have not come back to the workforce. Daycare is in shambles. It's a low-wage occupation. People haven't come back. Many daycares closed. So it's been very hard for many families to find viable daycare that they can afford. And then balancing out the expenses, it's been not economically realistic for many women to come back in the workplace. Men don't have that problem necessarily. And we don't see any relief here. And women are falling behind. Their reports are coming out from various areas. Higher ed research institutions show women falling behind. MBA data shows women are falling behind. So we've got a problem there, and it's not going to be easily handled. Then we have the two longer-term things that are affecting college campuses. That's the college debt crisis. It doesn't seem to be going away. It's impacting students of color significantly. It's eroding their income in their 30s and 40s, so it makes it more difficult to have income for homes and other expenditures that you would normally expect. And we don't see a lot of willpower here, both in politics or institutions, to really wrestle with head on with the college debt problem. We kind of take side stabs at it. The other big issue is it's emerging, and it will be dominant here in the next 3 or 4 years. The fact that women will dominate the college graduate group cohorts. They now make up 70% of admits at freshman year, even though your individual campuses may be more balanced between men and women. They're certainly graduating at more than 70% of the graduating class are women. More men are not being retained. So when we get these differences like this entering the labor market, that really changes the labor market dynamics. And believe it or not, we really can't afford to have that many men not pursue post K-12 education in some form, and it's going to hurt the labor market down significantly. Now that the early studies coming out about what young men are doing is not so much that they are adverse to education per se. They just don't know whether there's value in going to college anymore. They look at the debts, they look at what the kind of jobs that most college graduates are getting, and really the feasibility of paying back debts. And so men are having significant doubts. So we're down at the end. We're looking at a labor shortage. You can label it a lot of different things, but we have three very serious immediate issues to the immediate labor market that are affecting us. And that's what I told you about women and the need for viable daycare is significant, and it's really hampering the labor market right now. Immigration, which we can't seem to get any kind of anything out of Washington, has begun to hurt us significantly. Some sectors of the economy, ones that you might in your region be not as familiar with, but in my part of the world and others, is ag sector. 80% of the labor in ag is through immigration. And if you wonder why your food prices are going up, is that the supply chain, both for labor and other parts of the supply chain, are broken in ag, and it's going to become more costly. But we're also looking at problems with skilled labor, where we used to fill gaps with foreign-born individuals. I noticed that the Biden administration just came out with relaxing some rules to get more immigrants, with high-skilled immigrants in the country. And the last one may surprise you until this week, actually, and that's retirements. Unlike economic downturns, where we have the stock market goes way down, we have people that are more guarded about their finances, and they stay in the labor market to protect those. This situation we've seen is very different. The stock market went like gangbusters until this week, and the housing market has gone crazy again. And so what happened was, what they began reporting out, 55-year-olds to 65-year-olds are retiring at a faster rate than anticipated, because they can leverage these resources that they have. Now, does that mean they'll be permanently out of the labor market? Probably not. They'll probably find other ways to come back in, but they're taking a break. They're re-looking at what they want to do. This was kind of unexpected, and what it's hurting HR folks is that these are experienced people. These are some of their top-end people that have the financial viability to do this. And so we're seeing a movement in the labor market that was totally unanticipated 2 years ago. So that's way more than you needed to hear, but those are the things we're dealing with. It doesn't make this a simple analysis of what's going on. So we'll go to the next slide. There's a lot of things that came out of trends. There are some things, but two of the kind of points I want to make, because it kind of has set the tenor for the entire year. One of them you would expect, and you have to deal with. We all have to deal with. But one that was interesting was that 50% of employers indicated that they now recruit across the United States, that they've dropped all their geographic restrictions to finding talent. Now, usually in trends, that number is around 20 to 23%. And most of the employers that respond are regional employers. They're employers that have facilities in defined regions. So they're located in Maryland or DC or Virginia, and they basically tap into your institutions for their talent. They don't go to California. They don't go to Colorado. The big ones will, and some of the defense contractors, of course, go where they can to get the skilled labor they need. But mostly the regional employers tap into the universities and colleges that are close to them. Well, with advent of COVID and the rapid adoption of digital technologies, employers found that they could drop their geographical boundaries and look for students everywhere. And this kind of changes some of the way that mentally that companies are approaching the labor market. Now, to be honest, most employers said, yep, we're going to stay regional because our facilities are there. We're not going to break that, but we now have the opportunity, whether it's to augment our highly skilled labor that we're having trouble finding, whether it's engineering, computer science, supply chain, whatever, or it's to enhance our DEI recruiting. We find that breaking down geographic barriers is one way to do that. A side note for that, we've seen a gradual increase in the number of employers seeking out historically Black colleges and Hispanic serving institutions as a response to DEI. It's moving slowly because a lot of institutions or organizations who are not familiar with these two types of institutional organ groups are trying to figure out how to make contact, how to work with them. And of course, everybody being overloaded, it's been taking slower than we expected. The other aspect of this phenomena is that the heavy use of digital and AI tools in college recruiting now, and 85% of employers said they've had to use virtual and digital strategies. That should come as no surprise. We're all in that environment. But the reason I point this out is 2 years before COVID, and we were looking at technical adaptation in recruiting, we estimated that about 40 to 50% of organizations by between 2025 and 2030 would be using some form of digital or AI-assisted tools. Most of them were digital tools, like virtual interviews and virtual career fairs and things like that. What COVID has done is send everybody to the deep end of the pool really quickly. And what's going to happen is we're not going to retreat completely to the shallow end or get out of the pool. As we're seeing at the end, we're going to see a lot virtual digital assisted recruiting here to stay. It'll probably expand in some ways as technologies begin to catch up now to where the demands are, particularly on the employer side. There's a lot of effort going in to improve these tools. But we're here, and you're going to see this run out throughout the rest of the presentation. So we'll move on to the next slide. Many of you who have followed trends for a while will be familiar with this particular chart. It shows what's happened in the college labor market. We're only focused here on the BA, but it's pretty similar for the associate's degree, little more erratic for the MBAs and MAs. But what we've seen since 2010 and 11, when we finally pulled out of the recession, we've seen a very steady, robust, and particularly since 2014-15, a huge demand on the college for college labor and new hires. And then in 2020, when COVID hit late in the recruiting season, we had to make some adjustments. We anticipated a 10% increase. We probably weren't very far from that in the end because COVID came late in the recruiting season, and a lot of companies and organizations had made extended offers and planned to continue to extend those offers and have those people come on board. We did see some adjustments in some of the areas that got hit particularly early with COVID. So Michigan, New Jersey, New York, they had to shut down recruiting in February compared to March, early April for the rest of the country. So we did have some disruptions in the market. So there is probably a slight adjustment down, but unlike an economic downturn, a recession, which we can see an immediate drop, we only saw a slight tapering off. And then last year, most employers were just sitting on the bench trying to figure out how to deal with this. It wasn't that they didn't need people. It was the fact that they had to sit to either create safe environments, figure out how to recruit virtually. Organizations were realigning jobs. They had to figure out what they needed. So there was just a hesitancy to just be overboard. Wasn't a collapse in the labor market. It just settled down to a wait and see market. Okay, so that brings us to this year, and we'll go to the next slide. Actually, the numbers were stunning about what employers' outlook on the market. I always ask, how confident are you in the market? What do you think it's going to look like? And this year, 66%, 2/3 said it's very good to excellent overall. And in our industry, it's 75% said our industry is really, really good. Now, these numbers are all-time highs. Usually when I report numbers out in this group, I have to go good, very good to excellent to get to 66%. That was not true. A lot of it is due to pent-up demand from just the COVID's caused, and now that we're just dealing with COVID and accepted it, we're moving ahead. A lot of it then has to deal with this great quit and these. So they're going to come into the college labor market and try to augment some of these hires that they need to replace. So there's just a lot of positive outlook among hiring managers, people in HR organizations. It hasn't ebbed one bit with Omicron, and they're just very aggressive. Even though everything's virtual, we have our big winter career fair coming up, and the number of people there, companies attending, is just as many as if they were on campus. Whether the students respond or not is a different question. But anyway, employers are very enthusiastic. That will take us to the next slide. And there were some changes that will show from next year. The one I point out is 35% had definite plans to hire. This is, rebounded significantly from the previous 2 years. Most employers have definite or preliminary plans. The number that are recruiting with uncertainty is still there. It's down. Employers have been recruiting with uncertainty more and more and more, even in the good years, because their hiring has shifted as technologies have come on, as they've realigned jobs and stuff. So a lot of times they're actively recruiting, but it's not until mid-year, this time of the year, maybe as late as February, that they get solid numbers of how many they're going to actually hire. The number that are not hiring is way down from last year, as you might expect. There's one number I don't put in here, and it's this other category. It didn't mean much 5 or 6 years ago, but it's taken on a shape of its own and accelerated. And that's back to employers telling us they're doing a lot more just-in-time hiring. Now, just-in-time hiring is not unfamiliar to any of us. It's been around. It's just not conducive to the college space, because employers recruiting new college talent have to wait until those folks actually graduate. So there's specific periods of time where they'll come onboard them, not immediately when they need them. And more in this economy, employers need more just-in-time hiring. Well, they found a way to do that with college students, and that's through using students that are engaged in online degrees or have the opportunity to shift some of their coursework to online, so they don't have to necessarily be on campus and still go to college. And a lot of employers are finding, with the flexibility, with students that are more flexible and mixing and matching online courses and sitting in classroom, they're able to bring them on. And there's students that be willing to do that. And where they're really leveraging that is after they have their internships or work experience with the organization in the summer, and they're coming back for their senior year, they're trying to encourage them to see if they can do their coursework more remotely, so they don't have to be on campus in class. And when they'll continue them on their remote team, keep them employed as a means to keep their connection to the organization. So we're seeing more and more of that in some form. And so I just point out that this is kind of new in the way that they're looking at online degrees than they've done in the past. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. This is the only not figures I'm going to show you. I want you to use the report. I'll tell stories around it, but this is what's happening this year. Up at the top, you'll see the red, and you'll see it's adjusted. I had to do some adjustment to get some stable means here. This we're always concerned in samples like this that you get some stable statistics. I had to take out the 1% of the very, very largest employers because their numbers so skewed the mean that I was getting such standard deviations that it distorted the data. So I pulled those out and held those aside. We'll see those in a minute, and worked at what the base was doing. This is also the lowest number that I've had providing numbers. I had 2,000 people finish the whole survey except for the numbers, only 717. Employers were really hesitant to pass out their numbers, even though they're very positive about the market. You can see from this that all the, at least from these employers, that all the degrees are doing very, very well. Now, before we get in a real little deeper into this, I want to just caution you that you should be triangulating this data as just one story among maybe what you're hearing from your regional economic folks from the state, maybe the Baltimore area, greater metropolitan area, what their labor market looks like. And then you can go a little broader. You should look at talk to your employers and see what you're hearing to just get a complete and accurate picture for what's going on at your level. This is just one story, but it's a positive one. What you want to see is it's a positive from the other people telling us positive, and if it's where my weaknesses might be that I might not pick up. So what we see here is a very, very strong bachelor's and associate market. These have been the two markets that have, since 2010-11, have been very, very dynamic as far as college graduates go. We certainly have some issues right now at the community colleges at a time when employers are looking them with the enrollment issues at community colleges. But anyway, the market looks good. Bachelor's market. Again, the MBAs look strong, and we're going to have to clarify that. Okay, so now I add back in those few employers at the very top end, and things change a bit. And what we see here is that what large employers just really boost the bachelor's market up to 25%. The associate market goes up to a little over 20%. But the MBA and masters actually are down. It forces them down. And in some cases, they're not hiring as many. And what we saw here was a lot of these companies, these big companies, were doing a lot of substitution where they were replacing MBAs with a significant number of BAs. This is usually typical in uncertain times when you don't want to pay for the expensive labor, so you buy down in a way. You buy labor that's less expensive that can grow into what you need. And so we're seeing a lot of that, and it's coming at the expense of the MBAs and the masters in business. The other problem with the masters is that the health sector is just crazy now. I mean, those people anybody is trying to staff hospitals and clinics is having a very difficult time in COVID, and the quit rate is getting higher as this is lagged on, and the people are burnt out. They've had to spend a lot more resources for nursing and associate degree help in healthcare than they've laid back on MPs and health and physical therapists and PAs and things just because of the demand, if they can find them. And there's a lot of disruption going on in that sector right now. We can talk about that in a minute. Anyway, when you look at size, which I'm a big component of because so many new college hires at the Bachelor's Associate work for small companies, they're not the large companies, they work for small companies. It's important to know what these small companies are doing. And usually you see some differences between small, mid-size, and large companies. Not in this case when it comes to bachelor's and associate degrees. Every size company is pulling in the same direction here. It's almost uniform upward and a kind of a surge. When you get to the MBAs by size, you see more mixed. The MBAs and masters are being hired by smaller firms, mid-sized firms, less likely to be large firms. It varies by region. Again, I suggest you get to the report and pull out these sections so you can see in a little more detail what's going on. But again, in the report, I caution the samples numbers get smaller, so we get a lot of variance in the numbers, and so you have to be very, very cautious there. The other thing that we want to talk about is sector of the economy. Usually I get a variance, and I have sectors I look at. Given that I'm from Michigan and the auto sector has been really stymied by the chip problem. If you go out to the remote parking lots at MSU, they're all filled with GM cars that they park there until they get chips for them. So we know that there's a lot of cars being made that just can't be taken to market yet. And so that affects their employment and their jobs. And so it was pleased to know that regardless of everything I led off with, we're seeing across the board, all the sectors are in the positive range of hiring, particularly at the bachelor's level. And that includes areas where we know we stumbled. Manufacturing is stronger than I expected. We're seeing even a recovery in oil and gas. We see retail up, though there's a significant shift here. Brick and mortar retail is still iffy. It's still a lot to do with even brick and mortar hiring people to deal with their e-side rather than their brick and mortar side. Even hospitality and business was rough, as is areas in entertainment, which includes museums, aquariums, and places where they've had to restrict admissions. They've had to be closed for time. It's been harder to staff there for them, even though we've relaxed that quite a bit in recent months. Other sectors that are having problems are having more to do with trying to catch up with wages, in particular nonprofits. Their hiring expectations are while they're dampened somewhat compared to the last couple of years, they're struggling, and they're telling me that we're just getting wage pressure as people raise wages. That's happening in manufacturing and other places. Not that, when went through the disruption in industry, we segmented labor force into older workers that got paid the same, and newer workers came on at much lower rates. Well, now, believe it or not, you can get paid $21 an hour here in fast food, and that's about as much as you can start making at a auto plant. So there's been a lot of disruption going on as this wage pressure has worked out. But most of the sectors are favorable. Defense is very strong. Consulting has been strong. Finance has bounced back significantly from some weak markets of late. So overall, everybody's going in the same direction. There's a few areas that are of concern, but we see everything, and that's really positive. That means there's going to be a lot of positions out there for all kinds of students. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide, please. One of the things that I asked is about salary. I no longer ask for actual salaries that they're offering for starting salaries. That's been proven to be too much for employers to add. Plus, we've got so many other sources now that are contributing that data that you have other places to look for that. What I'm looking at is, are they increasing salaries? And that's what I asked this year. For the first time, even since 2010-11, 53% said they were increasing salaries this year. A lot of it has to do with that wage pressure going on, and some majors are going to see a little bit more likely to run into an employer that's going to increase salaries than others. For example, when I looked and broke down who they were recruiting and who was in their talent pipeline that they were looking at, employers that were looking at accountancy, communication, social science, health science, that's nursing, and construction, ag, 50%, 4% or more of those employers were increasing salaries. Now, some of those are lower wage salaries and they have to keep up. But again, those were ones. When we look more around the mean, 50 to 53%, you saw in computer science, IT, data analytics, and the natural and biological sciences. Where it was more likely that the salaries the same as last year were in business and engineering and arts and humanities. They were going to keep them the same. They weren't lowering salaries. Okay, we'll go to so what you're going to see here, you can probably talk about is, some of your organizations can talk about is how serious is the wage pressure coming. I think salaries are going to probably go up more than employers anticipated back in September. And by June, they're going to have to accommodate some. Even if they do keep their pot separate from brand new hires, from experienced hires, there's a lot going on in organizations now, and they may just have to increase salary. So we'll go to the next slide. This is the biggest change, and I think we'll spend a minute here because I think it's important to you folks, because this has to do with early talent, and this is your internship programs. Last year, as most of you know, a lot of employers had to withdraw and sit on the sidelines with regards to their early talent programs, mainly because they couldn't produce, one, safe work environments to bring them on site, or they couldn't adapt to virtual types of internships. Either the work that the assignments weren't conducive to it, or they didn't have a lot of experience with that. So a lot of employers stepped aside, and we saw a significant reduction in opportunities last year just because employers couldn't provide them. Now, interesting enough, after last year's survey came out, we began to see an uptick in internships offerings and requests coming to campuses because employers had the summer to figure out virtual internships, and they began to offer more virtual internships. This year, we're seeing just a huge pressure for interns and co-ops and students that will work in professionally related positions if they want to work outside of a co-op. A lot of built up demand there, a lot of need there. Most everybody's hiring. Some are looking for some other options, though they weren't very specific on what they were. Now, most employers are going to hire what they've been normally hiring in the past. A third are increasing, and only a few are still having to reduce the number or keep them low, given the environment. Where the big change has come is where those interns, co-ops, and students will be. Of course, last year, everything was almost virtual, though there were in manufacturing on-site positions because that's all they could offer. But right now, what we're seeing is, and this was September now, 46% will host on site, and only 5% were totally committed to virtual or remote internships. Then in the middle, you had a group that was going to use a hybrid approach, which would be that they would then onboard their new talent on site for a couple weeks, put them in a virtual team, and then for the duration of their assignment, and then near the end, they would bring them back. That's one way to do it. Some were going to divide their internship pools in half and have half on site for half their assignment, and then remote the rest, and then reverse those who started remote into on site. There's all kinds of variations on this, but it was some way to bridge the gap between having students be totally virtual and not gain the benefits of being on site and connecting with the rest of the organization. 16% said they would not confirm at this time what their plans were. What they were planning to do was move ahead with virtual, but their preference was to be on site, and they would make those decisions in January and February. I suspect most of these will, by the summer, will want these interns to be on site. In fact, most of them will want them to be on site, depending on how the virus finally plays out here in the next couple months. Virtual internships are not new again. They've been used before. But I argued very strongly that they're only temporary. The real role for early talent programs is not just to complete a job assignment, which you can do in a variety of different ways, unless it has to be done on site, like in engineering or design or something like that. But these programs are there to develop rapport with young talent, to bring them into the organization, to understand how the organization works. There's a lot of serendipity go on, a lot of connections. It allows them to set up mentors, which are critically important outside their supervisors. There's so much that goes on here. And what we've learned from students that had to graduate and enter this market in the last 18 months, some work's coming out of the University of Penn. I've only heard it in a podcast, but they're showing how lost so many young people are because they're working remotely. They haven't made connections personally with the team. They haven't, a lot of them, it took a long time before they even got into the physical office space, and they're lost, they're adrift, they're not settled in, and it's not just hurting the worker, it's hurting the organization. So again, I don't think you're going to see a lot of early remote work offered to brand new hires, and you're going to see only virtual internships used in very specific cases or very specific organizations, and those organizations tend to be in the IT sector. But when it comes to unique situations with virtual, you're going to see that niche probably unfold because employers have found that while it's ways to keep a potential employee on board after they have to return to school, or maybe in your case, you have them working with you while they're in school, but then they leave campus to go home for the summer because they don't want to pay the room and board costs. So they go home. They're probably going to get another internship. Well, now you can offer them a virtual internship. They can work at home. They could even have another internship, but they can work around that. And it keeps them connected so that when they come back, you can invite them back. They haven't lost any ground. In fact, it can take on more responsibilities. That's what one of the insurance companies does here locally, and they've increased the number of retentions in their internship pool, and not only that, it's led to a higher conversion rate after graduation. Anyway, so the dynamics are going to be very different this year when it comes to internships. There's going to be a lot of push by employers to find these interns, so it's going to take Kristen and all her staff a lot. They're going to be busy, and they probably already seen it, if I bet. And what you're going to see is, again, a lot of people are going to move away as fast as they can from virtual and only use it when it gives them a way to maintain relationships with students. Now, others may disagree with me. I'm having internationally, they're more accepted. And so when I dissed virtual for a lot of reasons, I went through the reasons. My counterparts in Australia and New Zealand haven't been too happy with me. Anyway, so we'll go to the next slide. Now, what happened during the year, I was able to monitor groups of employers, have conversations, and particularly this past spring and summer, as I geared up for trends this year, I wanted to know how they reacted. What were some of the things they were dealing with that may cause them problems, or what did they anticipate doing permanently coming out? And from these small focus group conversations I had, I developed some broader general questions for trends. And what you're going to, and the nice thing about the survey was I said 2,000 people answered these questions. So I did get some really good answers here. So I'm going to walk through these. And what I attempted to do is take the smaller organization input I had and see what others were talking about if I got a broader scope of employers. So we're going to move through these, and we'll spend the last about 20 minutes on these, and we'll have questions and answers. So the first thing that came up that employers talked about was performing in the box. Now, I didn't coin this phrase. I wish I had. It would have been kind of cool. But anyway, this is how you look in the Zoom box. And when during an interview or a virtual career fair or an event that's being hosted by an employer where you're interacting through the Zoom box. And employers toured a lot of, initially a year ago, or when in 2020, now, almost 2 years ago, employers gave a lot of grace to when they had to suddenly convert to virtual interviews, and students were jammed in their apartments, and they just didn't have appropriate background. They didn't have appropriate technologies. But going into the 2021 year, employers got a little more rigid or demanding that the interviews be much more professional. And then they told horror stories of having to watch through an interview their roommates playing beer pong in the background, or students that would spend all their time obviously on their phone, whatever they were doing on their phone. There was an array of those, but how universal were they? How did all employers say that? Well, no, actually, surprisingly, most employers really felt that for the majority of students, they came professionally to these interviews. They came and they found appropriate venues to hold the interview. Many of the campuses, your campuses have provided space where a student could have a virtual interview where the backdrop was professional and things like that. But there was 5 things that did emerge from that actually were not very different from what you would expect in person. They were concerned about the inflexibility and the lack of open-mindedness among students during COVID, and not understanding that in the organizations, things were changing very quickly. Job assignments were changing. COVID was causing reorganizations at work. They were bringing on technology to handle some things that may not have been 2 years ago. So there's a lot of job requirements changing and career pathways, some that were being closed off, often permanently, and opening new ones. And they were concerned that students came in with some very inflexible expectations about jobs. They weren't realistic given the environment, and they weren't open-minded about, well, you might have to change your pathways. We're going to get you started, and you might have to adapt. And then then there was 2 that what you would you might expect. They didn't come prepared for the interview or the event. They just kind of walked through it. They grabbed a hold of it because they were told to or something. Some of them just didn't come prepared. They do that in person too, so that's nothing new. But they also were not interested in the opportunities the organization offered. They grabbed a hold of the organization because of its name, or they just thought it was something they might want. And then when they really got in to understanding what the haver had, that wasn't interested, and this put off employers because they were spending they had precious time to spend with students. They wanted to find students that were engaging with them, and in some ways, it's caused these organizations to redefine how they describe jobs. Now, this has been a long-term problem. And the last problem is, again, the continued awareness of your digital presence. Now, for those on the career service side, we've gone through this before. We've gone through periods where we had to coach students through how to use Facebook. And then we went to LinkedIn presence, and we spend a lot of time on their LinkedIn presence. Now you're going to have to talk to them about their digital presence. It's important. It's just as their LinkedIn presence and their LinkedIn profile. Anyway, these are the things that concern employers the most about working in the virtual environment with students. It wasn't their communication skills. It wasn't their ability to read cues in a virtual environment versus an in-person environment. It wasn't some of the other things that you might expect, though they certainly might have popped up. But these are the ones that they were concerned about. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, one of the things is, okay, you're moving through COVID. When you come out of COVID, how likely are you going to modify your recruitment strategies and take advantage of the different kind of opportunities now presented with the role of technology. So I asked them a number of ways that they would be, their organization was going to participate in firing college talent and internships. And we gave them a number of options, and 4 options stood out. So they can pick more than one option. So these isn't going to total 100%. So one is the events with selected campuses. So my organization is going to work with selected campuses, both remotely and in person, to develop our talent pipeline. This is very, very similar to pre-COVID. This is what the recruiting landscape would look like. Organization has its core schools it goes to, it reaches out to, it attends events on campus, it will participate in remote events, and that's how they build their talent pool. Now, the characteristics of these people might surprise you. Yes, on one hand, a group of them are large employers. They're branded employers. They've invested a lot of money on the campuses they go to. And then the others are these regional employers I introduced talked about at the beginning. They are very dependent on going to their regional campuses and community colleges to find talent. And the way they do that, because they don't have the big name brand recognition, they're not maybe as visible to a student. They need to do as much on campus as they have the resources to do. So they want to get back on campus, okay? And so, and then we have another one is that in this group is we're going to hold events with just our organization with multiple schools. This is very much the domain of very large employers. They tend to be name brand. And what they're doing is consolidating their recruiting in an area and not spending so much staff time. So what it is if they go to an area and they send their recruiting teams there for 2 weeks to deal with 5 or 6 institutions, they're now combining them. We're going to host this event for those 5 institutions, and then it'll be virtual. Either we'll host it or we'll have one of the schools host it. The students that would like to interest in our organization will come to those, and out of those, then we'll decide who we're going to send down to have an event for those people we select in the process. Now, a good example of this, one that I know is currently happening, is down in Research Triangle, where organizations come in and they spend time at Chapel Hill, NC State, Duke, Elon, and Wake Forest, and now they're holding one event, a virtual event. All those schools are invited. Then they have not had an erosion in the number of students interested in their organization. And then they sort there, and then they come back and invite the students out of that group that they want to meet with, and then they'll hold one event where they'll assemble all the students down in that area. I expect those will continue. That's been a big payoff for these organizations. Another one is smaller. It's actually organizations hosting events with their own technologies. They, in general, what they do is they go out and do the work on Handshake or whatever system they have with students. They identify students that are interested, and they invite, or students they're interested in, or students reach out to them. They invite them into their own career fair or their own in-house, where they talk to different types of professionals in the organization. And you're seeing some of this, not on a large scale. Where you're seeing it, though, is where organizations have difficulty in finding hires for certain locations within their organization. Either their college recruiting team is not able to go to all the schools in areas near where some of their facilities are located. Nabisco and Kraft and others have been, PepsiCo have been on this, the food sector in particular, because they have remote processing plants out west and in places where it's been difficult to send candidates from their core schools in the Midwest and the East, don't want to go there. And so what they've done is use their own technologies to invite regional students from regional schools that are closer to those facilities, and that's worked out very, very well for them. So we'll see some of that. The majority of employers, however, are going to opt into combined events with multiple employers and multiple schools. So there's going to be multiple employers. It's a typical virtual career fair. A lot of them will work virtually on these. It's become a little more popular. A good example in my area is the Higher Big Ten Plus. The Big Ten hosts several career fairs remote every year, and it's been very, very, it's gained more traction of late, and we're seeing more of these take place. And we'll see why these are particularly appealing to employers in a minute. So you're going to see these combinations of ways to approach colleges and universities for talent. It's not just all going to be back on campus. They're still going to venture where everybody wants to be back on campus, and there'll be a lot of that, but it's going to look different. It's going to have a different feel to it. So we'll go to the next slide. Some of the things that employers had tips for students. I'm not going to go through all of these. You can read about them in the report. I want to point out some. I was impressed about how universal these were accepted by employers. I didn't think that just hearing it from 4 or 5, it might not resonate well outside of those groups, but they did. And here's some things that are really important that you need to know. Almost 100% of employers says you have to bring your A game to the virtual space as you do to the in-person space. To us, that virtual space is just as important as that in-person space. Yes, we're going to get to that in-person space. That's where we value that very, very highly. But virtual recruiting is just as important as you've got to bring the same level of enthusiasm. You've got to express your adaptability. You've gone through some changes of late. You had to shift to online classes. You didn't like it. Did you sit and whine about it and poo-poo about it, or did you change the way you learned? How did you adapt? How did you continue to do well? Same way, you're now thrown into virtual recruiting. You don't like it. You whine about it. What are you going to do about it? How have you adjusted your strategy to approaching employers, to looking at job opportunities, to preparing for virtual interviews compared to what you did? How did you adapt? And the reason they want to know that is because every day they're going to have to adapt when they get to the organization, and they're wanting to find out people that are taking change and adapting. And if you're not adapting, then you're not going to make it to the further rounds in the recruiting process. The other one that I found very interesting, it was 60% of employers said you need to be proactive. In a time when most of my colleagues in on the HR side are inundated with emails, they can't even answer your email and stuff. They said we'd be really receptive to students being proactive and reaching out. It helps us identify students quicker. It makes connections. I was surprised at how willing employers were to see that. Some other things you might want to consider on the college side is they'd like to see a lot more research. Students doing more understanding of who they are and why and what kind of careers paths that they look at, more understanding of the job functions and how those are evolving and how the pandemic has changed those before you get to the interview. Research is, employers have always complained about the lack of background work that many students do in approaching interviews and connections with the employers. Boy, it's really important now. The other thing that I point out is technical, and it's 45% said to expect AI-driven tools in the near future. This is not virtual recruiting or virtual internships. That's digital tools. These are AI. These are human characteristics, and it's 45%. That may not sound overwhelming, but 2 years ago it was less than 5%. We didn't see this even growing to 45% until after 2030. Remote work and a lot of the work that's going on in AI tools and remote work are going to quickly be adapted in the recruiting space. We'll go to the next slide, please.
Sure thing, Dr. Gardner. I do just want to be conscious of time. We only have about 20 minutes total left.
I will end this real quick.
Okay.
I'm going to point out, here's some of the things that are going to happen post COVID. And one of the things that stuck out I can be pretty positive about this. I think it's good. Is that students have to be more responsible for the managing the entire recruiting process. The middleman, the career service officer, is going to take on new roles. They're going to be less in areas of managing interview space, career fair space, and stuff like that. Those are still going to happen, but most of it's going to be between the student and employer. The databases handle that. So I'm going to go to the next slide. You can catch up on there. That's awesome that ownership is in job search, but it's a cautionary tale, and I'm just going to quickly say this. Joseph Stenberger has done some work, presented this in some of his work, and I've talked about this before, and I've labeled them different. But what we have here is we have navigators. They have high social capital. They have they've gained expertise. They've gotten skills. They've been taught by their parents. They've had coaches. They've had a lot of experiences. They've perseverance. They've done very well. I call them the directed. These are the navigators. They're going to take to this, regardless of what career service does or doesn't do. They're going to do very, very well. It's the other groups that are going to be the map, what we call the map list. There's going to be a couple groups. There's the ones with social capital, but they don't want to do the work. They want career services to do it work. They don't work. They don't stick with it very long. They're kind of adrift. This has been problematic for a while. And then you have the navigating without a map. It's not that they aren't working hard. It's not that they don't have doing school. It's just they're not sure how to get where they want to go. And particularly as the work changes, the mapless continue to grow. They lack the confidence to approach the labor market. They don't have the experiences. They don't have the family social capital that the navigators have to navigate the labor market. So if we're going to go to an environment where it's going to be more self-student managing it directly with employers, these job searches, the career service is going to have to step in, particularly with the navigators, the mapless ones, and really work long before they even get to where they're looking for a full-time employment. It's going to go back even before the internships and start working with them in different ways and not worry so much about the vents at the back end. Finally, the last thing I'm going to say is that virtual recruiting is here to stay. If you go to the next slide, it's on there. It's more in my. You can see that the benefits coming out of virtual and AI-assisted recruiting have to do with more efficient and effective use of organization personnel, which are really strapped now, and the cost savings. Yes, we want to be in those in-person, authentic connections. They will be there. They're just going to be at a different price, at a different time, and they're going to be critical. But a lot of the upfront work and everything is going to be done differently because HR staffs just don't have the personnel. And if any of you, I don't know about your particular offices, but I was on a call last week with a bunch of career service offices and how their employer relations staffs are getting rated by companies desperate to have people in their college recruiting because they're so understaffed. So you're going to see virtual staying out of necessity and cost effectiveness for organizations when they look at this. With that, I'm going to kind of slow down. I'm sorry I told too many stories. And then just want to say thank you for everything. I know that I don't see a lot of you very often, but this is my last Trends. I am 75, so I'm going to out of Trends. I'm still the director of the Institute because I have a number of research projects still ongoing, but there will be a Trends. It's still evolving how exactly it will look like. We'll be in touch with you. I will consult on that. But I can't tell you how much I appreciate all of the professionals in the field for helping me for 35 years with research. It's not a one-man show. It's not just a group here thinking up things. I really have to stand on some pretty broad shoulders to do what I do, and it's your shoulders I'm standing on. So I really want to thank you. So I do have a few minutes for questions. I appreciate that. Anything I can't answer, I'll be glad to try to get an email off to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gardner. I've seen lots of great support in the chat for the data. We do have a few questions that came in. I think you talked pretty extensively about career fairs and kind of the virtual recruiting, especially toward the end. So I'm going to ask this first question that came in about the shifts with the generation. So you talked about millennial values, Generation Z values, shifting some expectations in the workplace. And the question is, do you think that will be a pendulum shift, or do you think there will be long-term permanent changes that happen in kind of how work looks?
Well, they're not going to be a rapid change. I mean, millennials are still taking over the workplace, and they will then, by 2025, they'll make up 75% of the workplace. And they'll be gradual because organizational cultures are going to have to respond. And so that takes some time, and there'll be some resistance there, but it will happen. And remember, young people look at the world different. Their concerns are certainly different than boomers' concerns, and they're gonna act on those. Plus, I got in a discussion with a colleague of mine yesterday about the fact that young people, they aren't showing up for these virtual events, and we're blaming them. But really, when he said, look at their behaviors and how they've grown up, they're not used to just being crowded. They'll go out when they want to and find places, and they've got so many places now to look for jobs. I was stunned at not only my kids that are in this, but how my grandkids are doing this. But they're all using Indeed. They don't use their college services. They use Indeed. I mean, their things for them are very different in how they prioritize it. So instead of flogging them for not showing up, I'm trying to understand their behaviors, and so we can adopt. I think employers and career service are going to have to adopt more than young people are going to have to adopt. And going forward, I think it's going to favor young people moving forward.
Great, thank you. Another question that we got was about digital presence. So you talked about the role of career centers. Typically, they're doing resume writing, resume reviews with students. Do you think that will shift into, digital CV reviews or
Yes.
LinkedIn reviews?
I think, I think, resumes have gotten pretty old school. I mean, students can go online now and get a resume critiqued in software and stuff. I think there's special cases where the career professionals on campus need to step in and help with a resume, I think. But I think really that's kind of an old school type of activity that we really should have tools to do that. But more important is, how do we coach students to use the resources available to them? How do you use Handshake to identify employers? How do you reach out to employers? How do you react when employers and have conversations when they immediately reach out to you? You're not seeing them at a career fair, and how do you go about researching that company and then framing a response? It's a whole different way of looking at things, and so I think service has to do that. And then how do we've already taught them about their presence on LinkedIn. How do you extend that now to your presence now in these virtual environments? What does your professional image look like? What is the materials you present look like different? Now you have strategies more creative. You can actually add in YouTube things and stuff like that if you don't run into any violations of recruiting laws and things like that. So there's a lot going on that's going to change. And I think Mariana Savaca is a good friend. We were on a conversation last week, and she said, I know most of us are just reacting to what's going on and trying to do the best we can. I took it as a chance to say, look, this is going to change. What are we going to change? How are we going to change our relationships? Who do we need to make relationships with now on campus that we haven't before? This is a great time to look at it differently rather than trying to react to a problem and put our holes and fingers in dikes, is to look at this as an opportunity to really figure out what we should be doing next. And I don't have any great answers what next is going to be, but I think there's the time is right for it.
We have two more really great questions that came in the chat, but I do want to be mindful of time. So I will ask one, but maybe we can get a more in-depth answer over email around the future of the gig economy. But I'm curious, just to know if there was any commiseration of Russell's question around why is it so hard to get students to attend events? What can we do to improve student attendance? I have been feeling that in the work that I do with Collegetown, and I don't have a great answer to that, but I didn't know if you had any idea.
Well, I'd be really making lots of money if I had the answer to that. I said that I referenced this conversation we had because we're beating ourselves up and trying to beat up students to get to these events, and they're not showing up in the numbers we would like. And we know that these opportunities are some of the best opportunities they're going to have. And is it do we hammer student behavior, or do we try to adopt what we're doing to students? I don't have an answer yet because I'm going to have to look at this. Maybe in 3 or 4 months after I have some conversations and I can talk to some students and begin to frame some questions to ask them, I can figure out. But I think I'm as lost as anybody else. I mean, we're blaming students, but I'm not sure that's the right way to do it. We're trying to beat up students to get to these events because that's the way we've always done it. We've always had problems getting them to career fairs. I mean, what's new of in-person career fairs? I mean, sometimes they're really well attended, and then other times not enough kids show up. So, I mean, this is not something new. It's just taken on, it manifests itself in a new way. And I don't think we've really resonated there. I need to think, and when I get off, this is one of my last presentations. So we're going to regroup and rethink of what we learned in the last 6 months and start telling employers and see what we can do. But unfortunately, I don't have a good answer.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gardner. I am so appreciative of the time that you were able to take with us today. There are a couple more questions that I will send to you via email, and if you can share any quick thoughts to those, I'll get them out to the group.
Be glad to.
Thank you so much. And if you've noticed on your screen, I do have 2 additional guests that have joined me with our last 9 minutes or so. I wanted to make sure that everyone in today's event knows that Baltimore Collegetown could not do this event without the support of the Maryland Technology Internship Program or the Maryland Career Consortium. I wanted to give 2 representatives from both of those organizations a couple minutes here at the end to talk about some upcoming opportunities and to thank you all for being with us. I will turn it over to Annie Weinstein from the Maryland Technology Internship Program to talk about some resources and opportunities for you all, especially those based in Maryland, to get some internship support.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. Welcome. That was a great presentation. I feel like I need to really think about that and go through his slides. I think Caroline Baker said he's speaking so much, he's telling stories and they're not on his slides. And so I feel like I wasn't even really looking at the slides. So anyway, thank you so much for hosting him, and thank you to Baltimore Collegetown for having us all and getting us all together. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Annie Weinschenk, and I administer the Maryland Technology Internship Program, which is a reimbursement program for Maryland employers with internship opportunities. And so we actually pay you back for your internships. So if anybody has any questions, if anybody wants to connect with me, we are at capacity for spring 2022, but opening applications now for summer. If you work in a career center capacity and you don't know who I am, I would love to connect with you. All details can be found at mtip.umbc.edu. I'm on LinkedIn as well. Please connect with me. It's a great resource if you have an employer forum or if you have an employer meeting before a career fair. It's a great added benefit for them. This program's been able to fund 800 internships across the state since 2018, and we are always, looking for more partners and ways to get the word out to employer partners. I want to also thank all the MTIP employers who are currently on this call and dedicated time out of their busy schedules to improve their internship programs and connect with students. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kirsten. Thank you all so much. mtip.umbc.edu, and looking forward to hopefully seeing you all in person at some point.
Great. Thank you so much, Annie. And again, in our last couple of minutes here, I want to make sure that our representatives from the Maryland Career Consortium have a few minutes to join us and say hello. And thank you all for attending. And so I will give our closing remarks over to Matt Golden from Johns Hopkins University. So take it away, Matt, to close us out for this year's Internship Bootcamp.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I just wanted to start. Obviously, I want to thank you, Kirsten and Baltimore, Collegetown, for really thinking about this opportunity for all of us, giving us a forum to come together and hear some of the fantastic insights presented today and in the report. We want to thank Dr. Gardner as well, not only for what he shared today, but just a body of work over such a long period of time that has benefited so many students, employers, and staff in higher education. It's can't say thank you enough, and it's been such a joy to experience that today. Yeah, I do want to say thank you to the MCC Board of Directors for very quickly, identifying the value in making this happen. Just based on the chat alone, it's clear how much value was felt from all of our stakeholders here. So a lot of thank yous all around to make this happen in the virtual space pretty quickly. Just a few general points from the Career Consortium. We've done our best, I think, as everyone here has in our own arenas over the last few years, trying to make contingency plans for in-person and virtual learning lessons along the way. And we will continue to explore, design, and execute opportunities to bring our students to employers, and opportunities like this where we can, add some value and professional development for all of our members. So where we stand now, while I think there's nothing definitive to announce, is we're going to continue as we have this virtual space to provide opportunities more at a regular bi-monthly cadence or quarterly cadence rather than a one-time a year conference. Eyes on emails and to your representatives in your offices for those opportunities. There seems to be a lot of really great value in some of these less than full day opportunities in the virtual space. So there's more to come throughout the year, and we'll continue to assess what the summer looks like as far as in-person virtual for our larger opportunities like the career fair / virtual career fair to safely and effectively take some of these insights and create the opportunities for students to connect with all the wonderful employers and opportunities. And with that said, I just kind of wanted to close out. One of the things that I like to do on campus with Hopkins with my students and my staff is create a little mindfulness minute space. It's something that I think I very much think before the pandemic was important, but even more so now, I think it's important to just create some space to be mindful of who we are as humans and who we're interacting with. So just a thought to leave everyone with: if you came here today excited for an engaging program, I can only imagine that you're leaving really energized. And I encourage you to take the time to internalize what we've heard here today, share it with your colleagues around campus, and with each other, and on your campuses, collaborate. Think of ways that this information and these insights can not only impact just student outcomes, but the student experience in partnership around campus. But I also wanted to point out that if you're here today, and for any reason, whether it's COVID related, physically, mentally, socially, and you're just not feeling like you're bringing your best self into this space, there's so many less opportunities for us to understand that and share that in a safe way in the virtual space. And I want you to know that just by being here, the interest that you're taking in supporting your students in understanding this is more than enough. And the fact that you're here speaks volumes to you and your character, and just the value you put on serving others. And that's enough. That's enough for me. That's enough for all of us. And I want to thank you, however you showed up today, for being here. and wish you the best for the rest of your day. Kirsten?
Thank you so much, Matthew. What a great note to end on. Thank you all so much for making the time today for Internship Bootcamp. Thank you to our Fearless Career Center folks navigating all of the challenges over the last year. And lastly, thank you to Dr. Gardner for a fabulous presentation. Check your email for slides and a recording and answers to more questions, and look forward to connecting soon. Thanks all. Have a great rest of your day.